party people! Soy loco por ti, Juquery! Soy louco em casa. Esse ano, o festival Soy Loco por Ti Juquery é em casa, em sua casa. Soy loco por ti, Juquery.
Olá, sejam bem-vindos e
Hello, welcome. We are starting now our fourth and last day of the second Health and Culture Seminar. I'm Eliatum Ribeiro. I work at Museo Osório Cesar, and I am the MC of this year's seminar. This seminar is happening on the second day within Soy Loco por Ti Juquery. The complete program, today's, the previous 3 days, if you want to watch or re-watch, are complete at soylocoportijuquery.com, our official website, and the program of the past 3 days are complete on our YouTube channel. So today, because we have many national and international participation, we have simultaneous translation for English and Portuguese. We have 2 different links, and you can find both of them in our YouTube channel. So in order to make it happen, we have a whole group of people in production working with us. So it's important to mention and remember all of them who are working with us. So the second seminar, Cultura em Saúde, is an initiative of Franco, the Rocha City Hall, and the Museum Osório Cesar from the Cultural Secretariat. So Loco por Ti Juquery is a project founded by PROAC. It has as partners Goethe-Institut, and it's the psychiatrist in Galen Nord Hospital, and it is supported by the city of Franco da Rocha and the Museum Osório Cesar. I'm really happy to be here as an MC since Wednesday. I'm a researcher, I'm a museology technician, and I'm really happy to be here to present and mediate this program with people that were and are my references. I've known them from texts and books, and now we are having a great discussions, each one in their own screen for this seminar, and so that this year we can have the Museum Osório Cesar, so we can become a strong museum and a reference for Franco da Rocha and the region. And it's already have a dialogue with museums in Rio, Switzerland, the US, because it has a lot of potential. And we've been fighting to make it this museum to be born strong and keep having this dialogue with Franco da Rocha and other places in the world. And as a reference, I like to call to the stand Professor Paulo Marente. He is a professor at Fiocruz Foundation. He's a reference in the anti-manicomial fight. He's a psychiatrist, and he's going to talk about isolation and mental health. Hello, Professor. Good afternoon. Thank you for being here today, participating with us. Now you're going to have 20 minutes, and then you're going to have 10 minutes for questions, so our participants can use our YouTube chat to ask questions. Yeah, thank you. You keep controlling my time because I talk too much. First of all, I'd like to thank you for the invitation. It's an honor to be here with you. I really admire this work. I also admire Osório Cesar's work. I'm someone who has always recognized and talked about his importance, his works. Nationally, it's one of the most important people in this work in art and madness, just as Franz Princeton, who is a great international reference for us. And also to participate in this debate, so Loco Portiges Queri. First, I'd like to say that I really admire a work that for me was very important, and that is Fight for Life for Juquery, who had one of the leaderships, a very good friend of mine. He's a musician, an artist, and other professionals in the community at Franco da Rocha who created this project, Fight for Life, where I wrote a book. This is the first edition, and that was 25 years ago. And it's still a reference for me, and I'm really glad to say that until this year it's part of the catalog. It's being republished with everything that I've wrote like at that time, and we talk about isolation and mental health and this discussion within Juquery. This is the last year that we are editing this book in paper. I now ask them to be released for download. And this initiative from Luizinho Gonzaga, he also launched a record and then a CD with the song Fight for Life. And the initiative was the trigger of a conception that I had in how we could turn this table in the idea of madness that has always been something bad, something wrong, and that we needed to change its meaning so it could bring more contact for society, for life. So Fight for Life became my project, changed my life. It brought a new path to my work, and I'd like to just first say that and honor this project. Now talk a little bit about this topic and bring it to our current times: isolation, mental health, and psychiatry. I work a book about that. It's called "The Man Is a Serpent, a Snake," and one of the milestones of all that was Philip Pinel, doctor, a philosopher. He was a congressman, someone connected to the Republic, French Revolution, and he's considered the father of psychiatrists, but also the father of clinical medicine today. Some people don't know that. They just connect the Pinel's name to psychiatry, but he was one of the people who built what we call the clinical practice today. And he wrote a book that found psychiatry in 1801, its first edition, which is the medical treatise on mental issues. It's based on naturalism, natural sciences, and he talks from Linneo, the father of botanic, Bacon, Hume, Locke, Condillac in France, Cabanis, who is the philosopher who invites Pinel to work in an institution that then becomes a mental health institution. And this work was very important because Pinel managed to organize psychiatric knowledge. Not only he organized the concept, the way to deal with this new field, and he called it alienist, and maybe he was the first alienist, and it's a new object, which is mental alienation. That's why Machado de Brazil, Brazilian writer, wrote about a psychiatric hospital here, because the alienated hospital for alienated people. So Pinel came up with some strategies, like a framework, the concept of mental alienation, and the first proposal in order to treat morally mental patients. And so, what is isolation for Pinel? Fundamentally speaking, based on Linus, the father of botanic, to observe these people, we need, to observe a plant, you need to remove the plant from nature and take it to an exclusive observation space. That's why we get from in nature to in vitro, like a lab. So he could observe and watch the plant without all the inconveniences of like wind, rain, sun, and predators. And this act of removing an object, the object of knowledge, from its environment and transporting it to a place where it could be observed exclusively, was what they called isolation. So Lino did that for botanics, and Pinel brought this to the field of alienists. So the act of isolation, before being like a politicum asylum segregation, is an act of knowledge. That's how it started. It's important to know that before we started criticizing this model. On the other hand, Pinel observed, not only from botanics, but other institutions, like other education institutions, like seminars with, for example, for the church, they provided this isolation. And of course, there are some institutions, for example, in a greenhouse, it improved the subject, in this case, the plant, without all the problems with the weather, parasites. Of course, the plant will grow prettier, under control. So, and what we're going to see in the nature sciences, when man intervenes in order to improve the object it's studying, it's interfering with this object to the point where it can even create a problem of an animal in a cage cannot reproduce correctly or survive. And the same thing with plants and parasites, little bugs. Actually, they reproduce the species, the plant species, as species. So they get the seeds from here and throw them there, and so on and so forth. So the two principles of isolation initially were isolate to know, so to be able to observe and say, I can observe alienation in its unique state, and isolate to treat, to recover. The idea that isolation, like the normalizing schools, the normalist schools, like the correction institutions, reformatories, penitentiaries, the name of these institutions indicated this pretension of having recovery for these people. So that's why Pinel called a moral treatment. And this was like a way of imposing truth, an institutional regimen to sleep, to eat, but also violence, not only in like using force, like violence per se, even like don't allowing people to eat and so on, and that will help, according to them, is that to recover these people through authority. That's why Pinel used to say that the alienist institutions had a lot to do with pedagogical, educational institutions. And that's a sentence from Pinel. I'm not going to say it completely, but it used to say that in general, it's very interesting to see the alienated to be at home, be well fed, with friendship and care, that I feel sad to announce such a bad news. There's no better way to deal with an alienated than isolated them from their relatives, from the society. So today, sometimes you say that people don't want the patients, like the crazy people at home, but it's important to remember that psychiatry that created this new order. Psychiatry created this principle, started telling the families that they shouldn't do anything. They had nothing to do, as I said, but deliver the patient to the hands of a doctor. From Pinel, we started the idea of the alienated houses were the best or the largest treatment, actually the best treatment way, better than medicine or anything. It's like to having a moral discipline. That would be the treatment. And in this line, we have Morel, Esquirol, and other alienists that followed Pinel. But in very short time, it showed that it was a failed model. So what you can see today, that chaos started to come to these sort of institutions because madness doesn't have the same order of the moral problem, like behavior problem that is from like a rebel youth or a teenager or someone with some behavior issues. So in a short time, the institution showed that it was fail. It would fail, and the people wouldn't recover. So then it was very interesting that in a session of the Psychological Society in Paris, the session where Eugène Morel presented its theory of degenerescence, the moral degeneration, where madness and alienation was the fruit of an effect. It was created by a defect in its origin. When in the organic formation of the person, and he was already receiving the Lamarck theory of hereditary, and he built this concept of degeneration, moral degeneration, moral mental degeneration, where the alienated will little by little will lose completely their thoughts. And this concept, for example, this concept was used later as the degenerated art by Nazis, and how they persecuted alienated, not allowing them to get married, sterilize them together with black, Jewish, and homosexuals. They followed this Nazi psychiatry that was had a lot of influence here in Brazil from the 1920s to the 1940s. So in this session where Morel presents his theory, and French alienist talks about something that was very surprising, a colony that he met or he got to know in Belgium, of agricultures, who there was many crazy people, many alienated that were walking around with their shovels and axes, and there was no problem. So the story starts that with a legend that in the 13th century, an Irish princess that was threatening her by incest. She was very religious, like a Catholic. She runs away to Belgium. And the story says that the devil would lead the king to incest. And the devil shows him where the the princess is hiding. So, and the king goes after her in the last attempt to marry his daughter. He gets there, and an alienated man who was watching it, as a miracle, was cured. So this princess was canonized, and she became the protector of the alienated. And for many years, the alienated were taken to this town from all over Europe to get cured, to get healed. So we have all the catharsis and miracles, healing, and those who weren't cured, they ended up like staying there through a negotiation with the family. So he found that very interesting. He started to reproduce this idea in some French mental institutions, French asylums. So psychiatrists appropriate a model which is kind of cultural and religious and take into the mental institution. So they create like alienated colonies, like Juquery colony. That means that it's an organization, a cultural from a certain, with people with certain characteristics. In some cases, agriculturists, the other Germans, the other Italians, and the other alienated. So this sort of institution, this sort of colonies proliferated in Brazil. Like Juquery was one of them. So we have like almost 30,000 people hospitalized. We have one of the largest one in the human history in Brazil. So we're talking about more than, Sergueira used to say more than 20,000. In Brazil, you can say that all over we had more than 30,000, of course. And that was the idea, that we could take this model of moral treatment to the colonies. They would have a lot of space for work. Agricultural work would be the therapeutical work. So Franco da Rocha was one of the pioneers of this model, and that created so many colonies like that in Brazil. Barbacena colony, where we wrote a book in 2008, and it inspired the Brazilian Holocaust book from 2012. Our book was from 2008. It's called Colony, A Silence Tragedy. It has all original pictures of the journalist who was in this colony, showing all the horrors, the tragedies around this institution. So in the beginning, when we got to know Barbacena, visiting this colony and knowing the calamity of the issue that this colony was living at the end of the 1970s, that we created throughout this more than 30 years, we managed to close around 60,000 beds or vacancies in these institutions. We managed to get thousands of people out of this actual concentration camps and go back to the cities, get involved in cultural projects, life projects, work projects, solidarity economy, creative economy, and we prevented other millions of people to enter these institutions. We created these caps, this like ambulatorial type of clinics. And we're not talking only about services, because those violent institutions in Barbacena, for example, we found a cemetery with 60,000 bodies on the back of this psychiatric hospital. We have a very classic case, Damião Ximenes, that Brazil was found guilty in the Latin American court, we we decided there was a treatment, of course, but fundamentally speaking, we wanted to make sure that the service, it goes beyond that, is to build new social spaces. And that's why some important cultural activities that we have like Soy Loco por Juquery, Loucos pela Vida Juquery, and some others, the carnival, block parades, and so many others. We have such a huge amount of cultural projects, and I think this is crucial. And right now, and the other very important aspect of this change, not only the cultural intervention in the way how society thinks madness, and what is the strategy that we might have to intervene, is epistemologically, like to bring to discussion what psychiatry brought in the mental health in Brazil. Isolation and a strategy of knowledge, and a strategy of treatment. Both have failed. In both botanics, natural sciences, it's not right to take animals to the zoo. We need to study them in their habitat, in nature. We need to study them in nature. And there's no other way to do that, to think of people, unless in their day-to-day life, in their daily routine, in their relationships. And the moral treatment was shown like with different names. They used excess chemicals, excess drugs, excess psychological interventions. It was shown that they are invasive and they don't build with people a good way for them to be in the world. And today we are watching a situation. I don't know how much more time I have. I was just going to ask you, Professor, I was going to ask you about that, about this relationship of the relationship between isolation and our moment right now, living in isolation. First of all, is that the moment that we are living, we are a moment of steps back. We are getting back to the stimuli, to encourage many communes and therapeutic communities that they are not actually therapeutical at all. What we can see is the outcome of these institutions. And that is crucial to know that now we are retrograding. We are taking huge steps back in the mental health issues for market interests. That was the reason. We have a problem, psychological issues, and we are bringing the market. And everything is towards market. There's no job, no social condition for the society. Part of this population will be the object of intervention, so that clinic owners, therapeutic communities, as they call them, owners, and the state, the government, will transfer the money to do that. And about the isolation, we need to have the isolation of a compulsory hospitalization in disciplinary institutions, asylums, is completely different than the confinement, social confinement and social isolation that we have right now. In such a different moment that we are living, where 20 years ago, we wouldn't have the option to do what we are doing now because of the internet. We have a crucial transformation in our relationships, but nothing compared to the confinement of these institutions where people are hospitalized against their will. They are submitted to an institutional regimen that is based on violence. Someone who is hospitalized in an institution where they represent a risk a social risk, a community risk. Even with the quarantine imposed, is different than the situation that we are living. I mean, it's different from the suffering of someone with a diagnostic that were with a diagnosis that were separated from their families. That caused a huge suffering for these patients and their families. But it's completely different than the time we are living now, of an isolation that we know that this isolation that we, in this case, we want for ourselves. Like the other day, I had to go out. I'm at the high risk population, and I saw two people without masks, and I was joking with my wife. I said, before we would get scared when we saw people wearing masks, and now when we see people without masks, we get scared. I saw two people without their mask, and I was concerned. But finally, I'd like to say that I'd like to call the attention with this suffering, this existential crisis that we are living right now, the sort of reflection is not a synonym of mental health or mental disorder. There's a segment of psychiatry or other sectors, but to making this suffering a pathological suffering, which is not a suffering crisis, the transition we have to live right now, mourning, losses of people and jobs, deaths. This suffering is crucial to reorganize our lives, work our mourning, go through it is crucial. For this reason, I try to guide people to not to consider what they are living as a disease, as a disorder in this sense, and to avoid as much as they can to go after medication, to go after drugs. We need to find new solutions. I know I'm running out of time, so I'd like to remind you that what really marked me was rereading Love in Times of Cholera, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, where he talks about this suffering, the quarantine, the confinement, and he said, I will try to take advantage of it and find a new meaning for my life. The way I deal with the world, with nature, with my loves, my feelings, and so on and so forth. So that is crucial. We are now having a lot of suffering, a lot of losses, and disorders in a sense of mood changes, but we are also having good and positive results. People are getting mobilized as never before to take care of each other. For example, the case of the community of Paraisópolis in São Paulo, at Maré in Rio, so many people that trying to look towards the other, they manage to analyze themselves and reorganize themselves. People in a situation of suffering, they make themselves available as an agent of solidarity and change. We can see a lot of suffering, but also reciprocity, altruism, concerned about others. And I think it's important to have this balance and try to see the silver lining, how this confinement more broadly can help us to find a new meaning to our lives. I think that's something that I'd like to say. Now I'm open for questions, comments, criticisms. Professor, it was so good to listen to you and your reflection about this time, the difference about a psychiatric isolation and the isolation we are living now. We have 5 more minutes, and I'd like to ask you a final question.
Gostaria de
You
saber,
mentioned Juquery in the beginning, your
quais são as
relationship
lições de
with it.
Juquery que você
Do you have
tira
any contact with the artistic production in Juquery?
qual o papel da tanto
Did you
na
happen to
Covid-19
see
como nesse
at that
retrocesso dessas
time
questões de isolamento?
this artistic production, and do you and how it is right now? For many years, of course, I got to know all this production from that time with Locos pela Vida, Land do Juquery. I don't know, I think you know this record. If you don't, ask Luizinho. I have like 3 or 4 records, a long play record, vinyl. It's coming back. I have my turntable there, and the importance of changing the meaning of the relationship, not thinking madness as a disease and suffering and mistakes, but also positivity, ability, innovation. For me, this Juquery project was extremely important, and it had an influence um, in Gilberto Gil. He was the Minister of Culture. I managed to work with them, Amério Córdoba, do Lima, in the creation of Locus for Diversity, Mad for Diversity. He was actor Sérgio Manberti, the Secretary of Culture, to come and see Locus pela Vida. And our idea was to get culture, the importance of art that is beyond therapy, like breaking the idea of fine arts, modern art, or whatever, and take. It was the decision by Bobard. He didn't call it modern art. It was an art museum. Art is art. He didn't. Lina Bobardi and her husband, they changed the meaning of art. Art is art. This idea of insensitive art, regenerated art, degenerate art. Art is art. And Osório Cesar did that brilliantly. And just like Prinzhorn, and the importance of art beyond therapy. Eventually, it can be part of a therapy, yeah, of course. Like breathing is therapy. So art is nutrition for the soul. It's the ability of talk to the other, to show yourself, to let you be seen. So art, the anti-manicomial movement, and art is a strategy of transformation, to transform the society to what we know as madness. It could be gender, racial. So to allow the art by someone who is mad, where this person is, where this person see themselves, and how they see how I see, I see the art of these people as how we relate with them. And that's really transformational. It transforms this relationship. When I say, okay, it's crazy, wow, how much this art leads to a transformation in myself. That's why this movement, crazy, mad about this town, is a fantastic work with points of culture. And unfortunately, we couldn't go further in nationwide. But so Loco por Juquery, the Secretary of Culture and cultural activities. I mean, there's creative economy. There are so many initiatives that are crucial in this transformation to break this idea of art therapy, art in its therapeutic art, but also production of life, production of subjectiveness, reinventing life and how we relate with nature. us in the mental health field, we have a lot to contribute, a lot. Unbelievable. It has a lot to do with Osório Cesar Museum. One of the things that we have in our model of the issue is to treat the artistic production as art. That it doesn't need to be associated as adjectives or primitive or art brute or degenerated art. Like recently, and I told them I wasn't, because the full art, maybe it would be horrible to have like this normal art, this reasonable art. That would be awful. The art brut, Dubuffet actually added art brut because you have a cultural art. When you say that something is a culture, you say that something is culture and this is not culture. So it's part of a different culture. So people are not part of the same context. So you create an isolation in art. And that is kind of dangerous. Eddie, I do remember, I don't know if you remember that, but when we did this seminar, Crazy and Mad About Diversity, Gilberto Gil said something that was wonderful. If you guys want to check it out, you just check it out. Loucos pela Diversidade, Mad About Diversity. There was a Pinel TV that we have here. We produced it in my YouTube page, and Gilberto Gil says that art cannot be classified as a folk art, brute art, streamline art. Art is art. And it's mainly the recreation of life. And I think that is very important. Professor, thank you so much for your contribution to this seminar. It was a very important speech about life, about isolation, a relationship with mental health. I'd like to know if you want to say something, and then we are gonna show you a couple of videos. I just want to thank you to be here. I don't know if I managed to talk what you were expecting. I imagine that it had to do with confinement, but I'd like to really make a point in one of the principles of psychiatry, which is isolation, and how created the practice of isolation, the great mental hospitals, and how epistemologically speaking, it was a failure. It was a fraud. So it's important today when you talk about compulsory hospitalization, we need to understand there is a sort of social repression sometimes for the family who's scared, who doesn't know what to do, then a response that will lead to an actual treatment. In most cases, hospitalization in psychiatric institutions of therapeutic unities, they end up in violence against the person who is hospitalized. It's crucial that not to forget that. An institution, a hospitalization, a mental hospital where you hospitalize these people is a violent institution. Thank you so much. Now, we are going to show you two portrait videos. One is Weston Khalid. He's a graffiti artist from the New Museum, and Marcos, a multidisciplinary artist who works in one of Franco da Rocha camps to produce his works.
Street Art mit verschiedenen Medien, Spraypaint, Acrylfarben. Ich habe Tiefbauzeichner und Maurer gelernt und eigentlich auch die ganze Zeit im Ingenieurbüro gearbeitet. In der Freizeit habe ich viel gemalt. Ich habe auch selber Skateboards produziert. Durch das ist eigentlich auch mein Künstlername entstanden. Und halt auch, weil ich dort eigentlich mit Schablonen angefangen habe, also mit Stencil, was ja eigentlich auch in meinem Namen drin vorkommt. Also sind auch die einen, sind eigentlich meine ersten Stencil-Arbeiten gewesen. Das war Stan Laurel und Oliver Hardy gewesen. Und ich kann es auch nicht sagen, irgendwie, ich habe einfach immer gerne gezeichnet. Ich habe auch immer probiert, schon eine gewisse Qualität herzubringen. Also das plastische Schaffen interessiert mich sehr. Und das ist eigentlich auch schon als Kind da gewesen. Jetzt hat das eigentlich alles ein bisschen angefangen. Aber ich würde sagen, die Wurzeln von mir sind schon eher Comic. Und weil mir Comic- und Animationsfilme so gut gefallen, bin ich dann eigentlich auch auf das Thema zurückgekehrt und arbeite jetzt mit meinen Figuren. Also eben sicher Banksy finde ich sehr interessant. Halt auch, er ist für mich so wie der Robin Hood von der Street Art, weil er auch Arme beschenkt, zum Teil mit seinen Bildern. Das kommt man vielleicht gar nicht so in den Medien mit über. Dann Herakut von Deutschland, das ist ein Künstlerpärli, das ein bisschen fotorealistisch arbeiten tut, aber auch sehr skizziert und unsauber. Und mir gefällt das mega. So der Style ist ein bisschen wild. Os Chemeos von Brasilien finde ich auch mega genial. Das sind sicher auch einer meiner grösseren Vorbilder. Und irgendwie probiere ich alles so ein bisschen unter einen Hut zu bringen von diesen verschiedenen Künstlern. Also, sie inspirieren mich und zum Teil benutze ich auch Schablonen immer noch in meinen Bildern drin. Und eigentlich schon auch mein Endziel, irgendwie alles noch ein bisschen wilder zu gestalten, als es heutzutage ist. Ich habe eigentlich auf meiner Reise in die verschiedenen Städte, wo ich Street Art gemacht habe, habe ich Künstler kennengelernt, wo es mir viel einfacher fallen tut, mit denen eigentlich in Austausch zu kommen. Ja. Aber ich weiss, das sind besondere Umstände, die mich das Erschaffen von Kunst ermöglichen tun. Da bin ich sehr dankbar darüber. Aber jetzt irgendwie einfach sagen, ich bin ein Künstler, mit dem kann ich mich noch nicht so richtig damit identifizieren. Ja. Wie gesagt, ich arbeite lieber auf der Straße raus, weil mich das auch viel mehr inspirieren tut als auf einer Leinwand. Das ist für mich Himmel auf Erden, könnte man sagen. Ich weiss auch nicht, irgendwie, ich tue sehr viel eigentlich noch Musik hören, wenn ich am Arbeiten bin. Dann fange ich auch an zu singen, zum Teil auch an zu tanzen. Und ich komme dann so richtig irgendwie aus mir raus und spüre mich auch viel mehr als so im normalen Leben. Es gibt wahrscheinlich auch fast keinen Augenblick, wo ich an irgendetwas Umstudieren bin, was ich als nächstes machen könnte. Ja, für mich bedeutet das einfach Frieden. Ja. Ich bin mittlerweile wahrscheinlich in über 30 Städten vertreten. Also auch Melbourne, Sydney, London, Hamburg, Düsseldorf, Amsterdam, Rotterdam. Das habe ich aber auch zum Teil Kollegen zu verdanken, die mich dort unterstützen. Ich habe durch das ich auf der Straße arbeiten durfte, auch in Galerien in London, in Amsterdam, in Düsseldorf arbeiten. Die haben mich oft auf der Straße gesehen und sind eigentlich so dann auf mich zugekommen. Ja. Wenn ich eine neue Figur kreieren tue, dann ist das ein spannender Prozess, weil es ist nicht planbar. Und ich probiere es dann zum Teil zu wiederholen. Und das gelingt mir aber nicht. Und so bin ich wahrscheinlich mehr halt immer wieder neue Charaktere am Suchen, dass mich selber auch nicht irgendwie so unter Druck bringen tun. Und vor allem finde ich irgendwie, ich will noch so viel in der Kunst entdecken und mich weiterentwickeln, dass mir die Inspiration eigentlich schon sehr dabei helfen tut. Ja. Ja, ich glaube, die Figuren, die sind ich. Es ist so ein bisschen die Sicht auf die Welt, wie ich kann, oder so, wie ich es halt auch mit überkommen. Und ja, die Figuren haben sehr einen grossen Teil von mir eigentlich drin. Ja. Ich glaube, es ist zum Teil sehr schwierig, die Botschaft in meinen Figuren zu lesen. Also vielfach heisst es einfach, die sind süß. Ich finde, das ist aber eigentlich nicht unbedingt der Fall. Sie sind alle so ein bisschen schelmenhaft. Und klar, zum Teil möchte ich den Leuten eine Message mitgeben. Aber was ich eigentlich am liebsten auf der Straße raus ist, irgendwie die Leute überraschen. Also eigentlich sie ein bisschen aus ihrem Alltag rauszuholen, aus den Gedanken rauszubringen. Und wenn sie vor der Wand stehen und irgendwie smilen müssen, dann nachher, freut mich das umso mehr. Ja.
Primeiro eu faço esboço pequeno. Se eu fazer esboço bem pequeno e aquele esboço sair do jeito que eu entendo, então a minha arte já é feita. Eu estava me procurando. Quando eu se achei, eu consegui me achar dentro dos índios, porque saíam mais. Eu me achei dentro dos africanos, que faziam uma parte histórica que não poderia ser lembrada, porque tem até uma barreira, porque as classes sociais, hoje, elas prestam atenção em outros tipos de sentidos. Eu fui esperando todos os dias para poder entender até onde eu ia. Comecei a fazer minhas artes, vendia. Era muito bom saber que pessoas iam gostar do que eu crio. Os pássaros azuis, eu coloquei ele como o tipo de pássaro que não vai existir a história dele, só se eu for criada. Saber qual é a possibilidade de tentar entender o que eu estou representando em cada personagem, porque cada personagem vai do que eu estou imaginando naquele momento. Eu tento passar tudo o que eu consigo expressar. Tenha o sentido da arte dentro de si. Isso é o que faz a pessoa ser o que é.
Isso é o que faz a pessoa ser o que é.
That's
É o que diz o
what
Marcos, né?
makes someone
E
be
agora vamos ter uma
what
roda
they
de
are.
conversa
So now we're going to have a
sobre
round
criações no
table
isolamento.
about
Vamos ter a
creating in
mediação da
isolation.
Michelle, que é
And
museóloga
you're
aqui
going to
do
have
Museu
the
de Arte Osório Cesar.
mediation
Trabalhamos juntos
by
nas questões
Michele.
museológicas do
She
museu.
works as
A
Museum
Michele,
Osório
ela é
Cesar. We
museóloga
work together,
formada
and
pela Universidade
she
Federal de Ouro
is
Preto.
a
Ela tem
museologist
mestrado e é
from the
doutoranda pela
Universidade
Universidade
Federal
Federal
do
do Rio de
Rio de
Janeiro,
Ouro Preto,
dentro da área
and
de
she
Ciências da
has a master's
Informação,
degree, and she's
estudando a
working on her
organização do
PhD
acervo,
from the
né, e pensando as
Federal
relações,
University of
inclusive,
Rio
do
de
Museu de Imagem
Janeiro.
Inconsciente com o Museu de
And
Arte
he
Osório
works
Cesar. E como
with
pensar uma organização do
the
acervo, né, a partir
in
dos
the collection
artistas ou
of
de
museums,
teóricos da história da
thinking
arte que se
about the
relacionam
collections
diretamente
from
com
the
esses
artists
acervos.
and how they
Nessa
relate
mesa, a
directly
participação da
with
Silvana
these
Gerard, que estuda arte
collections.
sonora
And we're
das
going to have
exposições,
Silvana
é
Gerard.
artista
She's
aqui do acervo
works.
Baok. Vamos
She's
ter a
researching
participação do
an
Pier Paolo
artist
Pizzolato,
here. We're going to
que
have
a
the
Michelle vai falar um
participation
pouco
of
melhor
Pier Paolo
ali, vai
Pizzolato.
falar um pouco mais sobre a
He's
biografia
gonna
dele,
talk a
mas que é
little
super
bit
importante esse
about
processo de
his
reabertura do museu aqui
biography
pela
and
Prefeitura
the
de Franco da
opening
Rocha,
of the
por meio da
museum
Secretaria de
by
Cultura.
the
Também
Franco da
vamos ter a
Rocha
participação do João Henrique Queiroz, que é do Museu Bispo do Rosário,
administration, and also Franco
artista
Queiroz,
visual,
who is from the
falar um
Museu
pouco
de
melhor.
Rosário. He
Ele é
studies
coordenador de
the production
projetos
of
lá
the
no
artists
museu.
from that
E
institution,
agora
and he
vamos ter
create
uma
projects
apresentação
there.
pela
And now
Michele, depois
we
a
are
sua
gonna
mediação.
have an
Ele chegou,
introduction
deixa eu
by
lembrar agora, uma
Michele,
apresentação
and then the
interessante sobre o jogo
mediation.
das memórias
So
do
the
Juquery,
presentation
que foi
will
criado pelo
talk about it's the
que
memory
funcionou o
game
Juquery,
from
né, e que agora
Juquery. It
está
was
acontecendo um
created
sorteio pelo
by the
Instagram do
museum
Loco de
and
Juquery.
together
Então
with
vejam
Juquery,
lá,
and we're
vejam
gonna
as regras. Uma delas é seguir também
there are some
o
rules on the website. If you
@museu.org, o
follow
Instagram do museu, né, para que vocês
museum
possam ganhar um
at
exemplar desse joguinho obras do acervo do
MAOC,
museu,
and you
que é
can
uma
win
possibilidade educativa
a memory
para a gente
game
trabalhar em
with
todas as
some
obras.
of the
Agora eu quero chamar a
work of art
Michele para que
here
ela
in the
possa
museum. So I'm
apresentar
gonna call
e
Michelle
mostrar algumas
now,
das obras
and
do
she's
museu.
gonna
Oi, Michele.
present
Olá, oi,
and
tudo
show some
bem?
of the works
Tudo
from
e com
Museo.
você?
Hi, Michelle. Hi, Ellie.
Também.
How are you? I'm
É
fine,
só
thank
lembrando que o
you.
último dia do sorteio vai ser dia
Just to remind
29,
you
né?
that the last day
28, né?
for
28.
to register to win this memory game is on the 29th,
da noite, né? Acho que era isso.
8 in the
Mas vejam lá,
8:30 in
gente,
the
no
evening,
Instagram.
right? Yeah, but check it out on Instagram.
É,
Agora eu te passo a palavra para que você faça a apresentação,
Now,
tudo bem?
I will pass the
Sim.
floor,
Ótimo.
and you're gonna make your presentation.
boa tarde a todos.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Que hoje é o último
Just to
dia
remind you
da
that today
Saúde.
is the last day
Vocês podem
of
ter acesso ao
Culture and Health
completo
Seminar.
no
You can
site
have
do
access
festival,
to
né, que é
the schedule in Loco Juquery website, and
neste dia, como nos outros,
today,
tradução simultânea.
just like the other days, you're gonna have a simultaneous translation into
no canal do
Portuguese and English. We have two different links
E os vídeos
on YouTube
das outras rodas de conversa,
for each
tudo
channel,
estão
a channel for each language, and everything that happened during the past 3 days, you can access to rewatch or watch for the first time. If you have questions during the presentation, you can write your questions on our YouTube chat, and we're gonna answer them later. So I'll talk a little bit about this memory game.
O jogo das memórias do Juquery, ele foi
The
pensado
Juquery memory game was thought for a
desse jogo vai ser usado
teenage or preteen group, and part of it will be used in our educational department here. So we can open, once we open our doors to the public. So it's a memory game, but it's also it talks about the memory from an individual point of view and a collective point of view. We selected 7 artists, and 14 works are part of the game. So two works for each artist. So since we have around 8,000 works, like 8,500, so it was very hard to make this selection. This selection is started first of 3 artists from the first stage, that is from the 40s and 50s, 1940s, 1950s, and these are artists that are among them. They talk about different culture and the relationship between culture and the person and the individual. Among these artists, one of them that we selected is Oituakaba. He has a Japanese background. He came to Brazil in the beginning of the 20th century, and he gets his memories from Japan, and he gets the images and he relates some of the spaces from Japan, and sometimes with a very red sun, which has to do with the Japanese flag. And that is like a ludic creation from him. The other is Julio Ribas. He is also known as Caraíba. We don't know much information about his life, but he has a very abstract work, and we can refer it to the indigenous production. So we believe that he kind of needed to preserve this sort of culture. So he brings these images. It has an abstract tone to it. And finally, regarding culture and the individual, we have Aurora. Silvana is going to talk a little bit more about her. And we bring also facts from her life. She's very good in she was very good in narrating her life, and also her poetic art. These are the artists from the first phase. The second phase that we work in Brazil as from 1980 to the beginning of the year 2000, we selected 4 more artists. And among them we have Almir Dávila and Ubirajá Ferreira Braga. They produced a lot here at Juquery, and their works are like really albums of images of the world. So we have history, figures, celebrities, places he's been in Brazil, and also work that he portrays the way his experience at Juquery, like the one that we can see here. And also dance, because that dancing was something that he liked a lot. And Ubirajara also has this issue that he talked about many topics. He's very related to political and religious subjects, and he's an artist who also works with the own idea of artist creation. So he talks about artist creation in his works. And some more philosophic topics. One of the works that we have in our memory game shows the past, the present, and the future. So in this image that you can see a train, it's like how time passes. And another 2 artists of this stage, of this phase, is Steven Seabach and Valdemar Lúcio Raymond. Those 2 artists, they also portray their experiences, but something that is very important in their productions is that they talk about, or they deal with the perception of reality. So Seabach works with landscapes, but there's also an eye, which is also a sun or a stars that shine lights to the rest of the picture. And like this eye kind of organize the space. So our first contact with reality actually is our eyes. So the way we see and how we select the images to bring to our memory. So Valdemar is more interested in geometric patterns in reality, numbers, repetitions, and he also deals with that in his works. There's something mathematical, like some sort of analysis, the physical analysis. And another important thing on Valdemar is that he also portrays the overlaying of realities, that you're in a space and things that happened like 10 years ago And so it's very rich to know all this way of dealing with memory and how our artists presented it. So from that, in this playful way, we could deal with all these complex layers in a more fun and educational way. And in this sense, we start from three different aspects. The first is the memory game will be played as a traditional memory game. So the idea is to find the same card with the same picture, the same painting. That's perception. And the second stage is association, because you have two works from two different artists, from two works from each artist. So the idea is to find the works that belong to the same artist. What is the style? What is so unique about these artists that you can see in many of their works? The third stage of the game is the relationship between artists in a more loose way. How can you make this relationship? And then you have to talk about this relationship that one can find. And then finally, the creation. So at that time, we create the connection between the memory of players and the memory of painters. So we ask the player to create a narrative based on certain images. And that's like completely loose. And so this memory game was thought to be a ludic way to deal with social distancing. So you can see that we have artists with very rich life experiences, and they show it shows their lives before they came to being hospitalized. And what they have in common is that they are all in the space of isolation, the context of isolation, and that's one of the uniqueness of what we have here in Juquery. So we have experiences at the same space, but with differences from other places and spaces. So now I'm going to start the round table with creating and living in isolation. So we have the hospitalization and also people like Obispo, the Rosario, Aurora Cursino, who subverted these environments where they were living at the time. So now I'm going to introduce to you some of our speakers. We have here. Hi. Hi, hello, good afternoon. We have Silvana Gera. She's a PhD in history, and she wrote the book History of Tattoo in Brazil. And after studying psychology, she specialized in Aurora Cursino dos Santos. Then we have Pier Paolo Pisolato. She's a master in architecture, and we focus in interventions in the cultural historical heritage. So he was the architect of putting together the new master plan for Juquery. And Henrique Queiroz, he is the coordinator of Obispo Rosario Museum Contemporary Art. Museum of Contemporary Art, sorry. I think we could start with Pisolato. I think it's a good idea to bring this relationship with the space. But if anyone wants to start as well, that's okay. So first of all, I'd like to thank all of you for being here. So Pisolato, we can go ahead. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank you the opportunity to participate at Soy Loco por Ti Juquery. It's the first time when this festival was created. I was out of the institution. I left in 2017. I worked there for almost 19 years. And little by little, I started first in projects, and then I started working with the art part and culture. Why not talk about culture? Juquery was huge and is still big. Paulo Amarante showed the figures of our population during their initial times. Of course, unfortunately, it was a time of exclusion. It was very complicated to understand, actually. And I think it's interesting to start thinking about it, because what Professor Paulo presented, I'll try to bring it to the context and the Juquery reality. So Juquery is the third psychiatric hospital in São Paulo. There were two before it. The first one was in an old big house that works in the late 19th century. Then the city grows, and we need to have this service outside of the urban space. So they follow to a place close to today where you have the city market. It was a seminar that it was adapted to be a mental hospital. And from 1887 to 1903, and then Franco da Rocha was the director of the second hospital, and he brings the innovation of creating psychiatric colonies. So in 1895, he proposes to the city of Sorocaba. It didn't work mainly because of transportation and the distance from the city of São Paulo. In 1898, they launched the first male psychiatric colony in the land where Juquery is today. So it's important to understand the dynamic of why this place was chosen. When we imagine how the city was growing at that time, we can see that at the final, like at the end of our colonial times and the beginning of our imperialist time, like when Brazil became independent in 1822, São Paulo is still a small town. We have the low town in Santos and the high town in São Paulo. In 1887, everything changes. São Paulo is like surging. We have the coffee culture well developed in the state. We have immigrants arriving, population growing. And then we have to remove this structure that started to bother the relationship, the socio-economic relationships around it, and take it to something a little bit far. But São Paulo starts growing so rapidly that in 1903, this area is already, it cannot be occupied by a mental hospital. At that time, we need to understand that the mental hospital at that time is an asylum. So if the name tells you this, it's an isolation with people with certain disorders and separate them from society, like normal people. So Franco da Rocha has the possibility to propose during the Republican part of Brazil to create to build a new space, taking into account the need of psychiatric colonies. So these colonies, they are mainly male colonies. The first female one starts in 1930, when we had Dr. Pacheco e Silva as the director of the Juquery complex. But Franco da Rocha, he decides to pick this area specifically, close to the Cantareira Hills here, because it is because of actually the railroads that we had. If you see the book from Professor Lundebrook and how of the growth of the city of São Paulo, we can see that this region, Caieiras, Franco da Rocha, Francisco Morato, they begin because they become a city because of the railroads. In the case of Franco da Rocha, at the Rio Juquery Valley, and that changes. Well, at that time already, in the 1950s, it changes a lot the space, because the core urban area that used to be called Grande Juquery is where today is the city of Maripura. It was an inhabited area at that time. So, and then the train arrived, and Franco da Rocha started to acquire land. It took a while. It was a very long process of acquiring lands. First, 2 large farms, and then he started to buy other areas. And what is interesting, and what I can see with in my master's dissertation, is that Franco da Rocha acquires a very interesting land, because he goes all around the banks of Rio Juquery, and you create kind of a unique biome. And that's why it was so easy in the 1980s to create the National Park of Juquery, to preserve the Cerrado, the Brazilian savannas, as they call it. So for isolation, for this type of treatment, here we can see some images of Juquery. At the end, it was in the year 2000, before the fire that we had in 2005. That's the asylum, okay, the hospital, not the psychiatric colonies. The colonies will be occupying territories at 4 or 5 kilometers, one from the other, and they are kind of self-sufficient. They used to be self-sufficient throughout 20 years. Like Juquery at that time would produce everything: food, water, bricks, tiles, soap, clothes. So we have a closed circuit there. And Franco da Rocha was growing around it. There's an interesting image. Centene was the references. The Sainte-Anne Hospital from Paris was the inspiration for the architect who built it, the first architect. And at that time, Sainte-Anne was a psychiatric hospital in the city of Paris, and that was the reference for Juquery. But what's the greatest difference between Sainte-Anne and Juquery? Sainte-Anne existed as a farm, and the city of Paris grows and suffocates Sainte-Anne from an urban point of view. It became urban very rapidly. So we didn't have, the hospital didn't have a colony. The asylum per se was the colony. And Juquery, because Franco da Rocha started acquiring land, we have a huge land around it. The central area is the size of the Ibirapuera Park in the city of São Paulo, which is a very large land. Here we can see the 8 colonies that was formed throughout time. You can see that the complex, the asylum, limited the border with the city of Maripura, the city of Caieiras, and the city of Franco da Rocha. So this structure remained in a specific biome, as I said before, that is very characteristic. And these small towns didn't get into it. Now, with partnerships of the city of Franco da Rocha, we start to have a more friendly relationship with this complex. So the institution Juquery and city Franco da Rocha are getting closer. The images that you can see now are the second asylum close to the river, to Tietê River, and the city market. in São Paulo. What was really well thought, what was brilliant, that was to use the constructive system, actually the typology, the building typology, which is a pavilion sort of it. There was like trendy in the history of health at that time, of course. After Franco da Rocha finishes building what is the first Mayo colony, and then the psychiatric asylum, with Pacheco, we are going to have Ralph Pompeu, who is an engineer, and he will carry on building what was Franco de Azevedo legacy. And in terms of architecture, it can create some paradox, because in the 1930s, we already have a modern architecture. Okay, we still have Art Deco, we use the neo-colonial architecture styles to the 1940s, but we already have some modern architecture experiences happening in São Paulo. And Juquery didn't see modernism in its architecture. Here we have the first Mayo colony and the asylum with the Franco de Azevedo project. And you can clearly see this pavilion style concept of architecture. Just to finalize, I'm going to open to my other colleagues. At this time, when I was the director of memory and culture, we faced the museum collection, Museum Osório Cesar collection. It was like, say, stored somewhere. It was very carefully stored, but it wasn't really preserved. Cesar, she protected this collection for many years, and Sueli worked with us actually for a while. And then, before she retired, then we have a wonderful team with us, and who is led by Gustavo. And we had the opportunity to catalog, separate, take care, restore, especially at the end of 1915 and 1916. The city of Franco da Rocha, with a very robust and serious proposition that we didn't have before, to carry on with this legacy. And today we have this wonderful collection being preserved, and in such of a short time, it will be made available for the population of Franco da Rocha, this collection. Thank you for your speech, Pisolato. I see this is going to be a very rich day. Professor Amarante talked a lot about the epistemologic issue of mental health, madness, and like bringing problematizing these issues. And now you bringing how the ideas of an era are materialized by architecture to occupy the space. So thank you for your speech, really. I was thinking about Silvana, but if you don't want to be the first, someone else? Could that be you, Silvana? So you have the floor. Okay, now Silvana has the floor. Or the mic. Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation, Vitor, Tasha, Elielton, Elena. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you, Elielton, and thank you, Pisolato, for telling these stories. I know them from my experience. I have this shirt is from an artist. It's a shirt inspired by his works. He's an artist from Obispo Museum. All right, now I'll start. I will talk about Aurora paintings, but before I will start with an introduction on Aurora Cursino. Okay, I'm gonna talk about Aurora Cursino dos Santos. She's from São José dos Campos. She was born in 1867 and she died in Franco da Rocha in 1959. Sorry for the quality of the picture. It's from Alice Brio, Instituto Moreira Salles, in their collection. She did that in the 50s. And Juquery, she went to Juquery to take the pictures of the atelier, the studio where Aurora produced her works with other artists. And she took pictures of Aurora in front of Aurora's paintings. So I will start by saying why I started studying Aurora. For my PhD, I studied marinheiros, and because of marinheiros, I did a tattoo. Marinheiros mean the sailors, and because of the sailors, I did tattoos. And then I started working on the prostitutes. Aurora was a prostitute, so she brings this to her works, and that means memory. So I'm going to talk about memory. I like to talk about memory because now we have like artists. Us, we are confined. Artists are confined from society because, of course, the artists that are hospitalized, they have their friends, their colleagues, but their mates, but us, as them, we have a time for remembrance. We can talk about Aurora in social media. We can see how people are bringing things from memory, like how we are cleaning our drawers in a time where we cannot really get out home much. And she's an artist of memory. And it's very nice that this memory game that you have here. These artists like Obispo do Rosário and Aurora and others, they produce art from memory, from the world they lived, they experienced before being hospitalized or as patients or inpatients. So she talks about Juquery in the present tense, and her life as a prostitute, and her teenagers and years and childhood. I like to mention this painting because Aurora paints a lot of sex scenes, and she paints from pain. I think her story is a story of women and prostitute. Because of studying and researching prostitutes, I did a biography of another prostitute. I got close to the contemporary prostitute movement. And it's rare, and Gabriela Leite worked her book, like prostitutes to tell the world from their point of view. In the history of art, prostitutes are painted. Like there was an exhibition at Quai d'Orsay about prostitutes. There was one at Lazar Segel in São Paulo, where they got many artists who painted prostitution. Lazar Segel was one of them. He has Mangue is a place where the prostitutes used to be, and you have many other modernist artists. And Aurora was not in this group of painters, no women and no prostitutes. And she paints prostitution from the inside. She was a sex worker in Rio and in São Paulo. So she paints scenes of body and ships. I think she traveled a lot from her memory. Maybe it was a delirium, but maybe it was true. For example, she paints this scene that she is like an orgy in a ship, like contraband or something. And here I have her painting from together with these prints from the 19th century. You have the sailors and the prostitution. So we have this in the imaginary, like prostitution in the port areas. So we have the art that that was created in mental hospitals. We need to see what they are creating there. Obispo wasn't in a studio, but these people, they have a vision of the world. They have their memory. I'm not an art historian. I'm a culture historian. So I'll try to get Aurora within her time. So this first set of pens, those are all from Museum Osório Cesar. They were wonderfully digitalized. People from the museum provided us. It was wonderful. It's really wonderful to work with people from Museum Osório Cesar and the Secretariat of Culture and Museum Obispo. People really wonderful and very important for us researchers to have access to your collection. So I will start with this idyllic memory. She's from São José dos Campos, rural area. It's like the memory where she lived, her childhood, like the cornfields. And she always talks about the church. She relates to church like in the past. Next. Okay, this is another memory. Her father had like a small store, like a bodega, and she brings the image of her family, like the little bourgeois family where she comes from. I don't know much about her biography, so what I have comes from her works. So he paints like idyllically about her childhood and preteen, in the little bourgeois way with the church and the family. It seems that she is very devoted to the Virgin Mary. It's called Nossa Senhora das Dores is the Virgin Mary in the Bible, when the prophet says that she's going to suffer a lot. And they present her with a sword in her heart. So that's how Aurora has a formal culture that is very well preserved. You wouldn't say necessarily that she's creating it under stupor or delirium. It's like a first communion type of little cards. She's an artist. She was a Maria Leontina student. When Maria Leontina was the coordinator of the studio, Aurora was there. Aurora. I think she's an artist, a true artist. But sometimes her deliriums start to show. This is a very well-penned painting, like the sleeves of this priest. So the first formal type of painting that Aurora did, talking about her life in her family and the church. Then we start the second stage, the second phase of Aurora's work. She's referring to the Virgin Mary. It's showing a scene of a priest abusing a child. She's, I don't know if hers or not, but she's referring to the experience of children, of girls, how they suffer abuse in the church in that time, especially from people that they should trust. And we have to bring Aurora to the story of women, not only madness and prostitution, but how she talks about the women's cause and trauma. This is a painting, is maternity. It's another subject that she likes to talk about. Apparently she had kids, but like many prostitutes, they were separated from their kids. We don't know that. But when created it in the studio, I'm not using the right term. I'm calling it the school. Osório Cesar created this school, but it was another psychiatrist who was there around the 50s. Well, in 1950, when she painted some of these paintings, Osório Cesar is not in Brazil. He was taking some classes in Paris. So she is in contact with Mario Ian, I'm sorry. And he talks about this painting and the way when he talks about Aurora, he said that while she was painting, she started talking about, she used to talk about her life. And she talks about, she paints this wonderful paint of a womb, like a baby inside the mother's womb. And it's a way to talk about maternity. And here again, it would be her daughter. She says, like, being a mother. It's one of her a verse which says being a mother. I don't remember and I cannot read here. It's a verse that anyway, it's poetry. She's talking about what it is to be a mother, and it's part of this set of paintings when she talks about maternity. This is the son mourning, watching the mother sleep. She used to paint in cards, in small cards. They used to get chewing gums. Actually, the Juquery patients, they used to work as like putting together chewing gum boxes. So whatever was left there, she used those pieces of cardboard to, and this is like the son watching the mother. There's a side table here, and there's a sentence there, which is also poetry. It said that some sons go back to see her mother. It's like a man inside the ship that is arriving to see his mother, and she personifies the son watching her sleep. I love this composition. Again, the sailors. I love this painting. I love it. Aurora, all the time, you can see that she starts to bring memory to Juquery. You see the doctor, but the doctor is wearing a protective shirt. We don't know that, but apparently she went to Germany to work as a prostitute. And I think this is a wonderful composition, and she again brings this topic of sailors and prostitutes. I'd like to read to you that Pagu, Brazilian artist, Alice Abreu took her pictures. I don't know if it was Maria Leontina who showed Pagu. And Patricia Pagu, she used to write in the newspaper about the works that were created in this studio at Juquery. And she says that at least some artists of Franco da Rocha are static is very, very beautiful, and that goes beyond the alienated symbolism. It's exactly what Paula was saying. That it's not thinking about the art. If you think of art produced in the 1950s as a therapeutical art, it's just art. Looking at Maria Lontina's drawings, I realized the importance of memory in its highest level. So to bring memory, this critic, affective memory that psychoanalysts try to archive and catalog, for me, it explodes very expressively in paints and drawings, and they are actually sort of contraband because they try to defend themselves from their own dreams in painting. So she's talking specifically about a specific Aurora painting. That's the drawing of an alienated artist, but it's an artist who is alienated. What you can see in these works are an artistic production associated to some cases, and the cases were reviewed and allow us to have this varied language. We can go to the next. I think I'm running out of time. I'll try to speed up. Next painting. Aurora, she paints many paintings that were like pornographic or nude. She was painting vaginas. Nobody was doing that at the time. At the end of 19th century, in the US a little bit further. But Aurora was painting vaginas here, so I think it's that the art created by mad people is a vanguard art. She paints this vagina talking about Italy, ports in Italy. And on one side she puts the prince and the other the president. And that is 1946. 1946, Italy became a republic. And Aurora is funny. She brings like many different scenes, like now Italy is a republic, not a monarchy anymore. So she brings, and it's the prince and the president are on the open legs of a woman. So she talked about the anus and the vagina, and but she used like the most vulgar way that a woman shouldn't talk about in 1950s, unless she was in a psychiatric institution. So this is a scene that she paints at the prostitution in Paris. She writes the words in French correctly. It's like a prostitution scene in Bois de Boulogne. She calls the police La Garde. So I really think that she's been to Paris, because she also, there's another painting where she writes in French correctly. Here I find it wonderful. I don't know if you can see this painting. She's making a wish for the saint. She wants to visit the Virgin Mary. She's a devotee, like many prostitutes. They want to be heard by good people, and she wants to work as a health sex professional. That's her speech. She associates prostitution, and later on we're going to have, in the 70s in Europe, we're going to start this prostitute movement, and during the 80s here in Brazil. So she was really very behind her time. So I interpret Aurora because she lived in, when they were starting electroshocks in mental institutions. There are many electroshocks machines. I see it as an electroshock machine. It's a hotel in São Paulo. It's called, in city of São Paulo used to call Piratininga. So it's a scene where she's having sexual relationship with a composer of Zequinha do Abreu, and she dedicated his waltz to Aurora. And she paints this relationship she had with Zequinha de Abreu. And this hotel is now in front of a railroad station. Now it's in front of the Pinacoteca. It's really, I want to talk about this painting more because I love it. This is where it is. This is today the hotel where Aurora was painted. Here's the train station, and the hotel is still. You see, the hotel is on the right-hand side, so she has a physical memory of it. She's producing and she's thinking about her life. Should I stop saying? I'm sorry, I didn't write.
Já seria bom passar para o João.
I think we should now pass the floor to João.
Tá bom, eu vou finalizar.
Now I'm gonna end this. Just one more picture, one more painting.
Não esse, o próximo, por favor. Não esse também.
Not this one, the next one. This painting, if you can make it large, just to compare with the previous one. This is another specific place where she probably worked. This is Copacabana. There was a church of Nossa Senhora de Copacabana. She worked in Rio in 1910s. You have the Copacabana fort with like whorehouse, the prostitute, a whorehouse. So they used to be placed there. And this painting is called the Mesh of the Law. Like we had a fishing village there. Like she was like talking to the authorities that were there to arrest her, and have the fishermen, and you have the Brazil flag. And there are some allegories there, so it's very, very interesting. Like the painting from Pernambuco, you have some allegories from the modernists, and now she can be part of art history from the allegories that she created as a prostitute with such an intense life, so many travels. And I apologize if I couldn't be brief, but I think my idea was to show some of her paintings, how rich her creation was, how rich her work was. We have many questions here. Thank you. Maybe you can tell more when we go to questions. Thank you that we started from the architecture of the space to the people, especially Aurora, who is an unbelievable artist. And now I'm gonna tell to the context of Juquery. Actually, not Juquery, which is Obispo do Rosário, one of the most important artists in Brazilian history. And I'll pass the floor to João.
Olá.
Hello.
Eu trouxe uma discussão muito fresca, eu acho.
I brought here a very fresh topic in my mind, and I want to start. I wanted to talk about art and isolation, considering some of what I know from Colônia Juliano Moreira. That's where I work, which is hard to talk from the place you work, right? I prepared a small text, and I hope I can keep you attentive, keep you awake, actually. Okay, after 6 months of the pandemic, I think that this was mainly my motivation and the reason why we have the round table, that's why I start with that, the recommendations from health agents. Here at Museum Obispo, we faced the challenge to reimagine and try to still be in contact with those who use mental health workshops, and the one that we have there. So I like to highlight this this project that we have. And the name of this project has to do with living and existing and experiencing. And the use of these areas is like a tool that helps the psychosocial integration of mental health patients. And this reintegration are our main goal. So here we have our greatest challenge. How can we encourage this people coming together in an age of social distancing? So we have all the decrees from and laws from the state of Rio. So our experimental center had to halt their activities, and from then on we started to create new strategies to reactivate our network. And among these strategies, we did a campaign called Art at Home. We launched it in our social media. We managed to raise 4,000 reais to buy artistic materials, to prepare some kits and distribute them to those people who used to come to our center. And we started to do some virtual work in our workshops to try to keep in contact with those who work there and the participants, to keep the activities going and guarantee a follow-up, a social, psychosocial follow-up with these people. So I like to make sure that nothing that we did was easy. Everything was if you ask what we were doing, we didn't know if that was enough or not. And now we'll come back little by little with some specific topics. And why we are asking this? Because specifically, the pandemic brought many issues regarding the work that we do at the Obispo Museum. Like many other things in this pandemic, things became more evident. And what was very clear to us that art is not enough when you talk about mental health. It may be very obvious, but it's one of the issues that we have. Not to reinforce that without network, without follow, it's impossible to look for anything in terms of mental health. And starting from this, I started thinking of my work. Now you bring here some of my thoughts in the role of art in a more practical way, especially in institutional psychiatry. I think that those things may be interesting and help us to understand it all. And I brought the memory of Colônia Juliano Moreira colony, and I think those are the pillars of our center. And Paulo Amaranthes talked a little bit about that, the history of asylums and mental health hospitals, and that go in line with Pierre and Silvana's speech. For those who don't know, psychiatry existence in Rio until 1920 we had 2 colonies at Ilha do Governador and 1 hospital founded in 1890, I'm sorry. 1890, as in Rio. And because in the first years of last century there were some changes in the context of psychiatry in Brazil, they started to modernize the service. Among these changes, I can highlight psychiatrist Juliano Moreira as the director of this hospital. And this scenario generated more resources for this sector, and At that time, Rio was the capital city of Brazil. So starting from this modernizing proposal, and when we thought that the life in city led to vices and moral corruption, would be a stimulus to develop mental health issues. And they decided to distance these people from the urban areas, and that was the institutional model of rural colonies and agricultural colonies. That's how two other colonies were created in Rio, one for women at Engenho de Dentro and one for men in Jacarepaguá. They were reproducing the model from Europe. Those closed institutions were becoming obsolete, and they were composed by the central area with infirmaries, and then we have colonies around where they could enjoy the open door regime. So we could guarantee a better hygiene, and we could guarantee a best control over patients, or keep them calmer, because the colonies tried to produce them an illusion of freedom. And I'd like you to keep that in mind. This expression was used by Juliano Moreira to express what they wanted to do, and he's contemporary psychiatrist, both in Rio and in Juquery. And he brings this illusion of freedom. Idleness is the most subversive thing in the world for madmen and for people in general, because freedom associated to the working colonies is the blessing of civilization. So in order to receive 600 patients, this colony was founded in 1924 where a used farm was located. And keeping this idea of freedom and to keep order in the colony, they offered, just like at Juquery, they would call it a practice therapy, or some institutions call labor therapy or occupational therapy. And the idea was to receive some patients living in the colony, to have to relate with their families, and they used to call it like also family therapy. And some research has confirmed that multidisciplinary regimen wasn't enough. And what happened was that many of these patients lived for years in these colonies, and their work were explored, like they worked as slavery work to fund the institution. In Colonia, Juliano Moreira started changing very subtly in 1946, and one of the first measures that he took was to change psychiatry, because he thought that it wasn't very efficient. So he added therapy. They tried to diversify all the therapies in the institution. But the change that they did at that time wasn't only to implement new types of work. Social life in all its aspects became the base of Hector Perez therapy, and everything was focused in resocialization and expanded it to all aspects of life. And he tried to reproduce it within the colony and called it practice, like a whole practice therapy. That was the name that he gave it. And the activities were diversified and started incorporating more occupations, sport, leisure time, and art. That's when we started like volleyball teams, soccer teams, music bands, sewing and workshop, And we started with the first painting studio at the colony, which is a huge, well-known experience together with Osório, Cesar, and Nisi da Silveira's work. The studio was created late 1940s, at the same time that Nisi studio was created and Juquery studio was created. And the work created that represented Brazil in an exhibition called the Psychopathologic exhibition in Paris in 1950 during the first psychiatric congress. And at that time, we can see that there was some sort of recognition. Of course, it wasn't really well known at that time. It's contemporary to the other studios, but this studio worked differently. While Osório said that art, to be brilliant, should be free, and the idea was to guide the works in Juquery, and like Nisi used the methodology of free expression. Here at the colony, the work was mainly in copying and reproducing landscapes, because the doctors thought that the ability the patient had to reproduce reality closer to the cure they would be. And through forms and colors, they represented the world. And their readings of other paintings had like a diagnostic way as well. And there was this exhibition in Paris. And in the catalog of the exhibition, they describe the profile of the works created by the patients. And one of them is highlighted, and his name is Antônio Bragança. His works are also part of our collection here at Obispo do Rosário. And of course, it showed that these paintings showed technique, but what is interesting is that they weren't exact copies. And that's very interesting. I just highlighted how, let me highlight how his work is described. He's black, from Pernambuco, 49 years old, single, and he wall painter. He's an alcoholic, so he's psychopathic, diagnostics alcoholism. He started drinking when he was 10. Besides all that, and his cultural level is appreciated. He's very critic. He makes painting a way to project his revolt. His story is the story of a rebel. His topics are mainly social topics, and it shows how he's ironic in cultures and the good manners. So it's very satirical because he has some kind of revenge sentiment against society. So Bragança was poor, black, excluded, isolated. He lived in the semi-free region of the colony. According to the doctors, he was tamed by the paintbrushes, and he expressed his revenge in the studio. So in this space, the cure would come not from free expression, but the way he expressed copying the society, and keep him segregated from society. Despite all the good things they have to say about his work, the exhibition in Paris and everything, Bragança lived in the colony from 1946 to 1967. He died there. I bring this information to remind you that art is not only what we understand as art, vanguard art that contribute the works of Nisi and Osório studios is just one side of what we call art. It's interesting to bring all practice, and there are many contradictions in this sometimes this way of dealing with art, they get close, sometimes they distance themselves. And it was more, in the case of Obispo Rosário, it was mainly, the scholarly actually, it was mainly focused on art in the fine arts way of it, their copy, but it doesn't mean that it's not subnormal. Now they were talking about the modernist movement, and they are correlating it to the art of the madman. This normatizing way of art, it received support by many intellectuals at that time. So, like, just to let you know how these ideas were captured in psychiatry, this week I got a book from Hernani Lopes, another psychiatrist, well known here in Rio. He published a book in 1955. It's called Poetry, Art, and Against Alcoholism. So we can bring art, and he accuses some poets to sing alcohol. To sing alcohol is a good thing, and he's proposing like some poetic way of go against alcohol. I don't know. It's something interesting. But now I like to talk about Obispo from this perspective. Obispo was diagnosed as a schizophrenic. He was hospitalized first in 1938. He was there for 50 years, back and forth in psychiatric institutions. After going through many hospitals, he lived from 64 to 89 at Colonia Juliano Moreira, where he died. Most of his work, or part of his work, was created there, and his production is correlated with the voices that he heard. And he used to say at the final days, when he was supposed to, at the end of times, he would present his works to God. And because of his strength, the guards would call him like the award sheriff. So, and she helped to control the rest of patients there. So she had some privilege. So he managed to keep his works in his cell. And he managed to accumulate or to collect all his works inside his cell. Yes, he had some privilege. For psychiatrists and technicians who were there, Obispo was considered like a lost cause. They allowed him not to participate in therapeutic activities and take his time working on his works, because that kept him calm, just like Braganza. But some of the staff saw it with curiosity, and they just thought that it was a very good way to keep order in that place. But for Obispo, his work guaranteed him his life in the mental hospital. He created his own world with his own physics and geography, and many of other patients couldn't have that. They were succumbing to the horrible conditions they were living there. And that represents the way of new ways of being in the world, in the adverse conditions. That's surviving. Obispo's works, we are talking about living and creating in isolation. And I'm talking about surviving in isolation. His works caused an impact in those who can have the opportunity to see it, because it's wonderful, aesthetically speaking, but if you try to contemplate with more sensitivity, you can see how it brings emptiness and depression, right? It shows life interrupted. And we bring the memories of the colonies of this colony, I could mention other artists in other mental institutions to say that only art and creation are not enough to allow a wholeful life. So we need to bring artist expression, but together with a network of support. And Paulo Amarante said that very clearly. Dr. Nisi called the catalyzing affection, and that's what she said that happened in her studio. And today I can call the network that we have this network of affection. And the idea is to try to reintegrate these people with mental health issues. In this context, our activities, they are efficient with its level of expression, communication. It's something that Nisi also talked a lot in her studio, and she brought to her studio, and tried to encourage the creation of new worlds to these people. And just to finalize, I like to say that encouraging artistic activities and creation for mental patients, they should go beyond of coloring walls. You see, I'm trying to bring a relationship between these historic elements and the work that I actually do at the museum today. Creation should awaken the desire in the patients to go beyond mental hospitals, and I start thinking, what would have been if Bragança and Obispo could create outside of the walls of a mental institution? And we can think of Aurora as well. We can say that these artists are genius despite of their mental issues. They are genius despite the mental institution, because they are genius anyway. And I think that's an issue that we need to pay attention. And it's important to think about art and creation when you think about mental health. And I think it's important to guarantee that art to play its part, to generate autonomy to people, that it can actually be an instrument of autonomy, and not only to create an illusion of freedom. I think that's it. I think I managed to stay inside my time. Thank you, João, for your speech. Very strong, very powerful, thinking about the issues that Paulo Amarante also told us in the beginning. I think it's a very strong relationship, that isolation is not defined by walls, like concrete walls. Many people that unfortunately can't wear a mask to protect other people. I mean, start thinking about other walls that unfortunately, even with vaccines, that I hope they can find a vaccine for COVID, we cannot bring down these walls that isolate some people because of issues related to race, gender identity, sexual orientation. This is very strong. Thinking who these isolated people are, why they're going to keep isolated, and try to think of this art as freedom is very important in the sense of emancipation, right? And not only an illusion of freedom. I think that's crucial. Now, I'd like to thank you all again, and I'm going to start with our questions. We have a question to Silvana. A very active participant, and she asks about the context that you created the short story about Aurora and Obispo. How did it happen? We cannot hear you. I'm sorry.
Oi, tá ouvindo agora?
Oi.
Hi.
Eu tô ouvindo agora.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Obrigada pela pergunta. Então, o contexto
Thank you for the question. Well, the context of this short story is confinement. I was writing this short story the middle of the social isolation, and I said, I've always studied and researched Aurora and Obispo. They are sailors. It's a sailor and a prostitute, and they are artists. That's why I put the two together. And with my research in Aurora's paintings, I found out that she lived in a street at the Lapa neighborhood, and she was Bispo's neighbor in 1935. And I keep imagining, did they meet at that time? She was a prostitute at that neighborhood. He had just left the Navy, and she was a boxer and a sailor. And we gained some time with the pandemic and the working from home. I'm a historian, I'm not a writer, but I decided to write this short story about the life they were living in 1935. In my confinement, I tried to create some art. I don't know if that's so good, but you know, it brings a little bit what I like to bring in my research in Aurora and Obispo, which is memory, and what Pagu said in her text. This memory transformed into art when you start thinking about experiences and you create this memory as a work of art and bring this contribution to culture as a whole, especially in the case of Obispo and Aurora.
Sim, é muito interessante.
Very interesting. Oh, also, I've published recently, with João's help, this text on Bispo. It's history and art at a magazine called Mal. And we added this text, and we think about this issue of the artistic production and how he saw the world, and how is he's in the world, how is he in the world from the inside. How he was reading the papers inside Juliana Moreira colony. So, and thinking contemporaneity at that time. So it's, yeah. Thank you for answering this question. It's really wonderful to think the relationship of artists, and it awakes us to so many things. I started writing more poetry when I saw this collection. It's something that awakes you to art. Now, I'd like to ask João a question. It comes from our chat. It's a little more complicated, so I will read it. What points would you highlight in the method of reproducing reality compared to Nietzsche's method, taking into account adjusting and insurgency? Well, I saw this question. It's from Fabiane. Fabiane is a researcher at Obispo Museum. She's always in our virtual activities. I'll try to explain it very briefly. I think that I just finished my dissertation, my PhD dissertation. It's based on this therapy at Colônia Juliana Moreira. It's an experience not very well known, and why it's not that well known. And I think I try to explain that in my dissertation. How do I do that? Is how we keep, of course, the memory about these experiences that were like innovative at that time in mental health, in the mental health field. And they are very important. And it's important to know Nietzsche's work and Osório Cesar's work to start rethinking our practices today, but from Colônia Juliano Moreira, we don't know much, and it's different. I couldn't identify any doctor responsible for the culture activities, the culture studio that was developing this work there. I don't know, to start to think what kind of methodology was being used, but I can identify some elements. And what I can tell you is that praxis therapy involving artistic activities at Colônia Juliano Moreira Colony, is in dialogue with psychiatry from that time. What goes differently is Osório Cesar work and Dr. Nise's work, that they are introducing the analytic psychology from Jung and other theories. And Juliano Moreira Colony, what they were doing that, the way they thought the studio, the artistic studio, was the same thing that they did, like, there's no difference if they were in a hospital or in the colony. That's how they understood praxis therapy. And the idea was to deviate the patient from their delusions and focus in a productive activity. I think that's that. It comes from the moral treatment, but they introduced some new knowledge as well. But initially, that was the idea, to keep the patient busy or entertained with a sort of activity that was not their delusions. I don't have enough time to explain all that, but Fabiana, the girl who asked the question, she can understand how different it was from the research developed by Dr. Nise. The research that she did with images and the way patients communicated, the way schizophrenic patients communicated, and she discusses the affection in the artistic creation. At that time, some doctors believed that chronic patients didn't have this ability to develop affection, and Dr. Nise proved otherwise. Can you hear me, guys? Yeah. Actually, sorry to get into this realm. This question reminded me of an artist from Museum Osório Cesar. I can't remember her name, but the most important thing is her story. This artist had two phases in her paintings. Okay, it was after Osório Cesar, when the artistic studio was trying to reproduce predefined models. I don't know why the choice was. They decided to choose Maurício de Souza, who is a cartoonist well known in Brazil. This artist, when she was, because of her medication, under control, he would draw the two main characters of this cartoonist, the two characters of Monica and Magali. They were the main characters of this. When she was in delusion, she was schizophrenic, she used some images like infrared, and then you were like, red was blood and black was like knives. When you have her works without saying her name, we cannot say that these paintings belong to the same artist. When she was confined to what is normal, she was drawing the cartoon characters, and when she gets into a freedom activity involved with her mental wishes, she creates this work that is very authentic, telling her sufferings. That's wonderful to see this difference. Sorry, Michelle. just gonna comment something very
A
fast.
gente não tem, lá no Museu Bispo, a gente
We
não
don't
consegue fazer
have at Museu Obispo this correspondence because, unfortunately, most of this collection from the 1940s, 50s, and 60s got lost, unfortunately. And some of these patients who created at that time, they have died already. So I think it's very interesting. I've heard from the staff of the Museum of Art and Unconscious how there's a difference when the artists are more medicated and when this free expression opens up when they are completely free, under medicated. Okay, unfortunately we are running out of time, but I'd like to thank you again for your participation. It was wonderful. I'd like to ask you more questions. I have so many questions to all of you, but I'd like to thank you again to all of you for participating in this roundtable. It's not because I'm the mediator, but I found it wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Now I'm going to say goodbye, and I selected one image from the collection. I think this is our final roundtable, and this is a work from Massaio Seta. This work was selected by the curators of our first exhibition, The Light Behind the Walls. Pedro Quintanilla, who was here in a roundtable with us. And I want to talk about this image because we found out actually lately that these ideograms, it's about a song of going back home. And it's a song very well known in Japan. It's in this context of isolation, it was used like that, to go back home. And there are other things I'd like to share with you that it might be important. Massaio was an artist who participated in these two stages, 1940 and 50, 1980, 90. She has a Japanese background, and in this work she's talking about going back home. And then I wrote a text. Staying home for us is a self-preservation for everybody's health, but is an experience of anxiety. Massaio's going home may represent a break from the hospital institution and a desire to have a true home where she can sing and dance freely. However, not only this contract of the house and home for us and home for Massaio, we can realize that something beyond. This person sitting, looking at a window, looking towards a window, and in this artistic way, going back home may be a way of feeling good again, and looking at a window to have this contact with the outside world. It's a time to create new roads for everybody. So thank you so much for those who've been with us so far. I hope you can carry with you this idea about staying home, isolation, and how we need to strengthen our ties. And I'm going to pass the floor to Ellie. Shelley, thank you for your final intervention. It's so important to remind you that not only the seminar, our context of this festival, we have many interventions around Franco da Rocha, the city. Now, after this round table, this wonderful one that we had with many exchange of ideas, we are going to show you a video about the interventions here in the city of Franco da Rocha during the festival.
Com o susto que ela levou da bicada da coruja. E a coruja foi na árvore. Não encontrou um zumbi? O zumbi pegou a coruja. E aí ela saiu voando.
Tivemos agora a exibição de um vídeo sobre as intervenções de
Now we
projetos que foram
just saw a
contemplados pelo edital do
video
festival.
about the
Acho
interventions
importante ressaltar que
that we
alguns
had
projetos
that
foram
are
feitos com
part of this
base em
festival.
obras da Aurora
I'd like to
Produções,
highlight that
que foi
some
apresentada pela
are
Silvana. Então temos ali a
are
intervenção pelas
prepared
artistas
here, and we have
Meire,
some
Ramos
artists like Meire Ramos
Mari Moura.
and Mari Moura
Silvia Sapucaia. As três trabalharam
and
juntas
Silvia
nesse projeto.
Sapucaia. They three worked together in this project, and we also had, in the meantime, the work by Lúcia das Flores, like trying to transform these works of art into poetry and music. You can follow us through our website, and our Instagram and social media, Instagram and Facebook. Now, I would like to call Victor Fish. He is the festival director, and who is one of our greatest partners. And I'd like to thank him for this partnership, and she's going to help us to, in our of all those thanks that you have to make to all people. Thank you, Eli. Are you relieved to coming back? Actually, I have a release in detention. I was really serious and uptight and anxious about this, but everything's been great. Thank you. You were wonderful. Okay, your participation ends now, so congratulations. Thank you, Eli. You were crucial in this process. Eli was saying that these works that are like populating the city, 15 artistic proposals that are being placed around town. And well, I have to say and thank everybody. It's my closing speech. It's a process that involves a lot of people, and soon we're gonna have a final presentation from Abel Luis, like to actually close the festival. But well, I would like to talk a little bit about this process. I was talking with Karine from the Goethe-Institut to understand how we managed to get here. How all these processes are processes of connection, of people, projects that brought us here. And I like to say that it had to happen, that all the process that brought us here had to happen. But for these 3 years of festival, everybody who were involved from Juquery and so on, and I see the beauty in building together this seminar and this festival. Many important people got together to prepare. It was a great team. I'm going to tell you a little bit about this process. Elena is our great producer, and we were like really thinking hard when we faced the pandemic to think how you were going to have this festival. How would it happen? Because we had that the 2 previous editions helped inside Juquery with the proposal of occupying the space, and I thought it would be impossible to have only an online version, like to just change media. And we were thinking about that, and Joanna Milan, who's always very creative, he thought about getting an art box that gets into people's houses, and then talking with Edmar Almeida and Marcelo. The seminar could happen virtually, yeah. It is actually sometimes it's even more interesting because it makes it as possible to build some bridges, like you have people from different places and locations, like especially this last round table had Paolo in Paraíba, João in Rio, so we have the international participations actually, and I think this was an incentive to do the seminar online. We spoke with our sponsors the city of Franco de Rocha, Goethe-Institut, the Living Museum, everybody liked the idea. And PROAC as well, which is our main supporter here, our main sponsor, they accepted this proposal, and so did Juquery. So I'd like to thank some people that were important in this process, from the city of Franco da Rocha, the mayor, the Secretary of Cultura, Brandino Tassiatofoli, very important in this process to build the seminar. Michele, who mediated this roundtable, our greatest presenter, Elielton Ribeiro. I'd like to thank Walter Albertin, Tayana Garcia, from Juquery, we had Glauco Siriac, Michel Tonin, Paula Carcos, and Beth Palma, who's always been with us in our YouTube chats, and then Fabiani. After Fabiani, Beth is take the second place in participation. From Living Museum, Janos Marcos, Alex Brugman, and all artists who were part of it. From Goethe-Institut, Karine Legrand and Yara Castanheira. From our team, Trapezio, Iana Pugliese, Julia Alves, Ana Video, Joana Milan, Maria Capaiotal, Farcheto, Márcio Cursino, Ranulfo Farias, Décio Silsati, Gabriel Grillo, Mariana Massoneto, and Juliano Rossi, Matheus Viana, and September Fish. The guys from the online transmission, our translators, Priscila Molina and Tatiana Manuela, and the whole PROAC team and the Secretary of Culture and Creative Economy in the state of São Paulo. Especially, I think it's relevant from what we are doing today, building bridges and paths and roads, the doors, windows, bringing lights to the parks when everything may look gloomy in this time of pandemic and the complex times we are living. I feel fulfilled when you think that our energy are being used to generate spaces like this one, connecting wonderful people together, those who've been here in these past few days, the doors that we open, where people can enter and transform their journeys. Elis Lady, yesterday, she ended her speech saying that live Nisa da Silveira, I cannot repeat what she said because it was just beautiful the way she did it. And I'd like to reiterate and add that long live Nisi da Silveira, long live Osório Cesar, Aurora Cursino, Elis Lady Bolsin, Edmar, Victor, Arturo, long live Arturo, Obispo do Rosário, Ailton, Corina, Satílio, Walter, Thomas, Mandialacta, Flávia, long live the birds that are flying over Franco da Rocha, long live everybody that I haven't mentioned, and Abel Luiz, who's gonna gift us with a musical reflection to end our second seminar in culture and health. Hey Bel, are you there? Hi, I'm here. Now I'm going to introduce you. He was born by Rodas de Choro, a musical scene in Brazil, by his father, multi-instrumentist. He coordinates a carnival block in Rio with an equipment that integrates actions in culture, carnival, throughout his 20 years of activities. Thank you so much for your participation, Abel. And the closing is yours. So bring the volume up, because now we are going to build more bridges, as you just said. Because music, and I say people that a lot, that we cannot think music to build walls, but to build bridges.
Trancado, isolado, perdido no mundo, pessoas sem rumo, perdendo a fé, pedindo fiado, sem ter o pro, querendo comer. Lá fora um monte de ratos molhados, maldade, ganância, projeto, poder, futuro, presente, revendo passado, lutando pra sobreviver. E daí é tão desumano, e daí ver uma família chorar, e daí para todos aqueles na linha de frente que dão suas vidas para nos salvar. E daí é tão desumano, não dá. E daí ver uma família chorar. E daí para todos na linha de frente que dão suas vidas para nos salvar. Trancado, isolado, perdido no mundo, perdendo a fé, pedindo fiado sem ter trocado, querendo comer. Lá fora um monte de ratos molhados, maldade, ganância, projeto, poder, futuro, presente, revendo passado, lutando pra sobreviver. E daí é tão desumano, não dá. E daí ver uma família chorar. E daí pra todos aqueles na linha de frente que dão suas vidas para nos salvar. E daí é tão desumano, não dá. E daí ver uma família chorar. E daí todos aqueles na linha de frente que dão suas vidas para nos salvar. E daí, e daí, e daí, para todos aqueles na linha de frente que dão suas vidas para nos salvar. E daí, e daí, e daí, para todos aqueles na linha de frente que dão suas vidas para nos salvar. Deixa aí meu boa noite, já deixo também meu agradecimento pela acolhida, pelo som, pelas boas palavras, boas memórias, bons pensamentos, boas perspectivas de presente e de futuro aí que a gente ouviu dos amigos, companheiros, colegas aí de sonho e de luta. E quando me chamaram para participar aqui, compor, falaram, poxa, a gente viu você contando histórias e cantando músicas. E eu fiquei pensando assim, como montar uma coisa legal para compartilhar, para dividir e para também trocar com a galera, né? Ver o que a gente pode despertar a partir desse encontro. E aí fiquei exatamente, acho que até pouco antes de chamar, pensando nisso. E o mais perto que eu cheguei foi esse fio condutor aí do som e desses artesãos do som, que eu vou falar um pouquinho mais, que eu escolhi para trazer hoje. Essa primeira música chama E Daí, é uma parceria minha com dois irmãos aí, que é o Kiki Marcelos e o Luciano Bom Cabelo. E vou pedir para quem estiver assistindo e a galera aí também na produção, me lembrar, porque eu botei essa para o início e uma outra para o fim. Então, para me dar um alô no tempo, que eu não quero perder o fim para não desfechar o enredo da história. E nessa coisa esses artesãos aí, eu trouxe um fio condutor que acho que também dialoga muito com a perspectiva aí do evento e dessa construção, que é para mim, né, o Engenho de Dentro. O Engenho de Dentro é o bairro onde minha família direta, né, nasceu, se criou, cresceu, onde eu também cresci, junto com as áreas ali vizinhas, né? Todos os Santos, Meia, Encantado, Piedade. E vamos dizer assim que ele tem dois marcos para essa galera da minha geração e anteriores ao Engenhão, vamos dizer assim, que é o trem e o hospital psiquiátrico, que popularmente se chama lá Hospital de Maluco, né? E aí a gente cresce, vive, e muitos já morreram, já fizeram a sua transição aí de universo, com essas coisas ao redor, das suas famílias, da sua vizinhança, do seu dia, da sua cultura, da sua relação. E aí eu trouxe, falando desses compositores, né, desses artesãos, eu trouxe alguns que trabalharam lá e que, para minha alegria, alguns que eu trouxe que trabalharam lá, eu tive a alegria de ser parceiro e de muito aprender com essas pessoas e fazer um pouco desse som junto. E eu queria com uma ideia que eu acho que é fundamental, que eu vou desenrolar um pouco depois, contando como eu fui parar lá, o que eu ando fazendo por lá, pelo atual Instituto Municipal Nise da Silveira, à frente lá do Curso Urbana, que é a palavra trânsito. Que eu acho que o trânsito vai ser já que a gente falou de trem, né, e dessas coisas que pontuam as estações, o trânsito vai ser uma coisa fundamental para a gente seguir para a nossa próxima parada. Ainda mais que a gente está falando dessa situação da pandemia, e falar do Aldir, que não só trabalhou lá, como trabalhou pela música, trabalhou pelo Brasil, trabalhou por um monte de lutas aí, e que, além de ter feito, estaria fazendo o seu aniversário agora, né, dia 2 de setembro, faleceu por conta do Covid no dia 4 de maio. Essa é uma composição de Alcino Corrêa, Ratinho, outro grande mestre meu, mestre da nossa música, Aldir Blanc e Abel Luiz, chama Copo Cheio. Tem gente que diz que quando bebe é para esquecer o porquê, não sabe o que fazer. No nosso caso, isso não vale, é coisa pouca. Eu sempre bebi para lembrar de você. No nosso caso, isso não vale, é coisa pouca. Eu sempre bebi para lembrar de você. Quando acordar noite e não vi os seus olhos entre estrelas no escuro, enchi a cara e bebi copos e mais copos para nublar o meu futuro. Penei, estive mal e no hospital pensava muito no seu riso vagabundo e de alta, ia direto pro boteco tomar um treco pra suportar o nosso mundo. Sou da noite, das calçadas sem ninguém. Na solidão, meu coração se sente bem. Até o sol, que é tão metido a astro-rei, sempre apagou nos botequins onde brilhei. Tem gente que diz que quando bebe é pra esquecer, ou porque não sabe o que fazer. No nosso caso isso não vale, é coisa pouca. Eu sempre bebi pra lembrar de você. No nosso caso isso não vale, é coisa pouca. Eu sempre bebi pra lembrar de você. Quando acordava à noite não via os seus olhos entre estrelas no escuro, enchia a cara e bebia copos e mais copos pra nublar o meu futuro. Penei, ai, penei, estive mal e no hospital pensava muito no seu riso vagabundo e de alta, ia direto pro boteco tomar um treco pra suportar o nosso mundo. Sou da noite das calçadas sem ninguém. Na solidão meu coração se sente bem. Até o sol, que é tão metido, astro rei, sempre apagou dos botiguins onde brilhei. Até o sol, que é tão metido, astro rei, sempre apagou nos botiquins onde brilhei. Tem gente que diz tá aí uma música inédita aí do nosso grande poeta, essa feliz parceria nossa. E eu lembro uma coisa muito, chamou muita atenção. Obrigado, irmão. Tempo aí que quando estava nessa correria do Aldir se cuidar, né? Aquela coisa, a esposa dele também teve Covid e felizmente está bem aí, firme, tentando aí adaptar-se a essa realidade, mas seguindo em frente. E a gente conversando como é que poderia fazer, como poderia ajudar. Eis que veio essa notícia do falecimento. E eu fiquei com meu filho, ouvindo músicas no dia, né? Fazendo minha despedida em isolamento com a família aqui.
Final goodbye. I'd like to give you a final goodbye.
Meu filho tem 9 anos. E aí ele
For
comentando,
9
ele,
years.
poxa, pai, eu conheço essas
And
músicas.
talking about that, I said, I know this song. Wow, that's really cool.
Ele me perguntou,
And then he came here and he said,
essas músicas têm
wow,
uma coisa diferente. Eu falei, o que que tem de diferente?
it has something different, right? And he said, I don't know. You're talking about things, and they get to us in a way that sounds important, sounds different. And he asked, why does that happen? I remember once when we were talking about words, and I said sometimes the problem was not what we say, but not respecting the words. As sometimes we don't know how the power, the mystery of the word. We talk and sometimes we listen what we shouldn't listen, and we don't say what we should say. And I think that Aldir had a lot of respect to the words, the mystery, the energy, the power of words, how we treated words. And he understood that words were life. And it's really wonderful with his songs that he tells so many stories, so many people, so many different situations, because if every word is life, everything matters. Life happens. And that's what makes this composer to be so important here in Brazil, who left so many wonderful things in our mind. And another partner who's one of great partner here is Ratinho. I will get back to him. And he was also one of my neighbors at Todos os Santos, the same city where Lima Barreto was born. I will now talk about the different partnership that we had with a wonderful person who worked there, who I worked with Valdir and Ratinho, and with someone who the more we did was talk about mental health. We had everything to write songs, and every time we met, we were talking about madness, to talk about Nise, to remind her, and so on. I have a great partnership that with him where I could put the lyrics, and it's called A Lot More Than Dreaming. It's a song that I wrote for my son, Ro. They used to live in a wonderful garden, And one day he came to my house and he said, listen, I have a song here. And he said, oh, I thought it was André. And when I said it was Dona Ivone, is a Brazilian singer, very well known. And he said, and he was singing with her. And I said, wow, what can we do with something so brilliant like this thing here? And then I started thinking, and I said, okay, that's the lyrics that I came up with for this song. Thank you, long live Ivone Lara.
Acordar e ter o seu amor, alegria que não cabe em mim, poesia que me libertou, canto de um querubim. Acordar e ter o seu calor, despertando o melhor de mim. Me revela seu olhar, viver é muito mais do que sonhar. Na mansidão dos seus pensamentos, tudo em mim se transformou. Nada vai nos separar. Todas as barreiras vamos superar. Impossível descrever que juntos de mãos dadas a cantar, viver é muito mais do que sonhar. Acordar e ter o seu amor, alegria que não cabe em mim, poesia que me libertou, canto de um querubim. Acordar e ter o seu, despertando o melhor de mim. Me revela seu olhar, viver é muito mais do que sonhar. Na mansidão dos seus pensamentos, tudo em mim se transformou. Nada vai nos separar. Todas as barreiras vamos superar. Impossível descrever porque juntos de mãos dadas a cantar, viver é muito mais do que sonhar. Laraia, laia, laia, laia. Laraia, laia, laia, laia. Laraia, laia, laia, laia. Laraia, laia, laia. Laraia, laia, laia, laia. Laraia, laia, laia, laia. Me revela seu olhar, viver é muito mais do que sonhar. Viver é muito mais do que sonhar. Viver é muito mais do que sonhar. Salve, Dona Ivone. Salve a família Lara.
Long live Ivone and Lara's family,
pouquinho desses
talking a little
trânsitos,
bit about
já
these
avançamos
movements,
pouquinho aqui na conversa.
now that we landed a little bit
O
our
que que acabou que
conversation,
fez a gente se conhecer além
what
da música
happened
e do samba
us
foi o Gente
to
Dentro e acabou sendo o livro.
not only start with the song and the samba, it was Engenho Dentro and Dr. Music, because when I had the opportunity to make a concert and to talk about how certain people were there, and we're going to talk a little bit about that, but it's important to mention, to consolidate or reinforce this conversation, that some of what became public policies and practices in basic protection and culture comes in social services and nurse schools and so on. Something that we used to talk is looking into life and people and think about power. The greatest care that she had as the first composer, song, music writer, Ivone Lara, her life was so avant-garde as a woman, as a black woman, as a composer, a songwriter, as a public servant. It's very important to say that. And we used to talk about many topics in her journey. Some of what we have as a psychiatric reform and the consolidation walked together with the redemocratization, opening, and we can also think about Aldir, and also I like to bring them, and especially when you talk about madness, and I'm going to get there. It was a psychiatric-centric Pedro II, Peter II. I got there through, that was the name of the hospital institution, and there was a different entrance. It was like a center for people living under vulnerabilities or under stress, or people living in the streets. But in our neighborhood, we used to go there because there was a soccer field, so we would go there and play soccer. Afterwards, we started to learn capoeira, the Brazilian martial art, and we started to try to climb the walls and get there to train like some capoeira moves. So, and we saw that inside it produced some traffic around, like it was internal traffic from the inside, and people who didn't get inside didn't know what there was inside, you know. We had an education center, they had a sports center, we have an art center for artistic activities, and it was the foundation of a community center was just in the verge of coming up. So, and there was a pirate radio there, and the idea is to get everyone, workers, members, staff, and the kids who would to play there, and start building this radio experience together. So in this community center, we had this radio, and we had other movements like soccer, capoeira, and other things. So starting from these traffics that I'm talking, or movements, we'll get to what led me to the concept of this place and how I see it. And what I think that defines it as great power in the quality of all this movement that it produced. I mean, following the movement and the traffic, we have many bus stops. I spoke about Dona Ivone Lara and André. And André, after his death, actually, with André, we decided to pay homage to Nisi and Ivone Lara in this song. And this is the first time I'm gonna play this song to you. First time we play this song, so it's
que toca o coração, vontade de sair por aí a cantar. É música no ar que toca o coração, dá vontade de sair por aí a cantar. Emoção de lidar, sentimento, canção, não tem hora e lugar, vai além da razão. Sim, traz de volta a paz e abraça a revolta dos temporais. Sim, somos eu e você, chama a viva que brilha no alvorecer. É música no ar que toca o coração, dá vontade de sair por aí a cantar. É música no ar que toca o coração, dá vontade de sair por aí a cantar. Emoção de lidar, sentimento, canção, não tem hora e lugar, vai além da razão. Sim, traz de volta a paz e abraça a revolta dos temporais. Sim, somos eu e você, chama a vida que brilha no alvorecer. Sim, traz de volta a paz e abraça a revolta dos temporais. Sim, somos eu e você, chama a vida que brilha no alvorecer. Laraiara, laraiara, no alvorecer. É música no ar.
Abel, está maravilhoso.
Abel,
está
thank you. It was
maravilhoso.
wonderful,
Esse momento
wonderful,
está
wonderful.
incrível. Mas eu tenho a te
It's
dizer que já
been
estamos
wonderful.
aproximando para o encerramento.
And
Você disse que tem uma música
it
especial no final, né?
breaks my heart to say that we are
Então,
getting to
vou
the
deixar
end.
vocês com
And you said
ela.
that you have a
Eu
very
falei
special song,
Maravilha.
so I'm gonna leave you with
da
it.
composição com
Great.
meus parceiros sobre o Idaí.
It's how I
Mas antes
compose
dessa
with my
música,
partners
a
with
gente tinha
Idaí.
feito uma
So,
música
but before
chamada
this
Bons
song,
Ventos.
we wrote a
Eu queria
song
deixar
called
primeiro
Bom
meus
Ventos, or Good
agradecimentos antes de
Winds.
encerrar.
So first I'd
A
like to
acolhida,
thank you
o
all
som, convidar
for
aí todas
receiving
e
me
todas
here
para
and to
conhecer lá as
invite you
páginas do
all
Loucura
to
Suburbana, tem no
visit
Instagram, tem no Facebook,
our
para a
web
galera
pages. We
colar
have
lá,
an Instagram
tem
and
um pouco da
Facebook.
história, um pouco
Just
dessas coisas que eu
get there.
contei,
There's some of
podem trocar
our
ideia, estamos fazendo,
history, our
reinventando
background,
aí
some of the
esse
stories
lance
that I've told you here.
escolher a galera, a nossa
And
rapaziada da
in
melhor
this
forma. E vai ser mais
times
um
of
dia,
isolation, how we
seja virtual,
how we
quando
did it.
possível,
And so you
presencialmente,
can be
encontrar
happy
todas e todos.
virtually, but
Maravilha.
yeah, I'm
E
waiting for
Abel,
you all there.
Diga.
So you can go ahead. It's all yours.
É hora do povo dar as mãos, é hora da gente se unir, de ser solidário com seu irmão, de compartilhar e reconstruir. Basta você acreditar que juntos podemos superar. Uma palavra amiga, um gesto de compreensão, amar além do meu querer. Nas cinzas vamos renascer. E quando todo mal passar, bons ventos vão trazer você. As ruas vão desabrochar, as flores vão prevalecer. E quando o temporal voltar, jamais iremos esquecer. De perto, de longe, de qualquer lugar, meu samba vai prevalecer. De perto, de longe, de qualquer lugar, meu samba vai prevalecer. É hora do povo dar as mãos, é hora da gente se unir, de ser solidário com seu irmão, de compartilhar e reconstruir. Basta você acreditar que juntos podemos superar. Uma palavra, um gesto de compreensão, amar além do meu querer. Das cinzas vamos renascer. E quando todo mal passar, bons ventos vão trazer você. As ruas vão desabrochar, as flores vão prevalecer. E quando o temporal voltar, jamais iremos esquecer. De perto, de longe, de qualquer lugar, o nosso samba vai prevalecer. E quando todo mal passar, os ventos vão trazer você. As ruas vão desabrochar, as flores vão prevalecer. Quando o temporal voltar, jamais iremos esquecer. Perto, de longe, de qualquer lugar, samba vai prevalecer. As ruas vão desabrochar, as flores vão prevalecer. De perto, de longe, de qualquer lugar, o nosso samba vai prevalecer. De perto, de longe, de qualquer lugar, meu samba vai prevalecer. De perto, de longe, de qualquer lugar, o samba vai prevalecer. Salve!
Hey.
Hello, crazy people! Soy loco por ti, Juquery! Soy loco em casa. Esse ano, o festival Soy Loco por ti, Juquery é em casa, em sua casa. Soy loco por ti, Juquery.